Fort Bragg, California is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It has a kind of Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean, that misty, almost eerie small harbor town. But it's beautiful and a huge tourist attraction. You get people from all over the US that travel here. My fiance and I decided to drive up here after I had to take some time off of work due to stress. It was a last-minute decision and we packed up our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure that I would have lost her. I guess this is where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now, and we are staying at a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog roll in during the early hours of the morning, and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to go get their haul for the day. It really is a beautiful thing to see. We woke up early and I was craving, and I mean craving, eggs and bacon. After getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces at, we left for our morning adventure. So here's where I made my mistake. I was driving down the road and it looked like the stop that we crawled up to was a four-way stop sign. I guessed wrong, because when I pulled out and cut off a small Ford Ranger with a dinky trailer attached to it and two old men driving, I realized it was a little too late that I had cut them off. They threw up their hands and pointed at me, but Lily didn't even notice it. I threw my hands up in a, "Sorry, I'm just a dumb tourist" kind of way, and they just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff that George Strait would have been proud of. I didn't think much of it and kept driving down the foggy two-lane road to get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to her about it. I never thought that I would see them again, and I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong though. I was wrong, and I'll never forget what happened next. We got back to the motel after a not so great but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the future and what we wanted to do in life. But midway through our conversation, she realized that we were out of dog food to feed Bruce. I agreed to going up to the cute but creepy market and grabbing a bag of goodies. I kissed her on the cheek and jumped in the Navy. We called our navigator Navy. I left and got about halfway to the store before I realized that I had forgotten my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw it. That same Ford Ranger with the janky trailer attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it. I don't remember seeing them here last night, I thought. I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder wondering, what are the chances these guys are staying here? And then not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see a sliver of light but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside, but I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never even there. My heart started racing, and I dropped my keys on the floor and ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer in New York. I didn't see the creepy old guys from the Ford truck or Lily outside. I was becoming angry and frantic by this point. Come on, where did you guys go? I thought before the screaming inside my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking and I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from. And that's when I saw her and our dog inside the office. She was crying, sitting on the floor sobbing uncontrollably, and his hair was standing straight up until he saw that it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clerk is on the phone and I'm wondering, what the heck happened in the 2 minutes that I was gone? This is what happened, told by her, and it makes my body run cold. It turns out as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by and those inbred guys knocked on the door. Lily opened it up thinking that it was me forgetting my wallet, which I did, and they tried to force their way into the room saying, "You can thank your boy toy for what's coming to ya," while grabbing her and covering her mouth. But those guys didn't realize one thing, and that's that we had a dog in our back seat when I cut them off. Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her, and they kicked him and tried to shake him off, but he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing that the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off and Lily was able to sprint to the front office and wait for help while Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there and I couldn't protect her. If we would have found a dog sitter and our plans weren't last minute, she could be gone right now. But my dog was there and he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do. And for that, he truly is my best friend. If he wasn't there, what would have happened? Would she have been taken, killed, or all the above? The craziest thing is that they haven't been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff. I told them what had happened earlier that morning, and the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't and they got in there with her, you could have been filing a different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that. I looked over at Lily and Bruce and thanked God that I had rescued him from the pound, because in return, he rescued the love of my life when I couldn't. This happened a long time ago. I was around 5 or 6, but it comes up every once in a while at family gatherings. And though it isn't as bone-chilling as some of the stories on here, I figure that it fits well enough. For context, I have a very close extended family, as in a huge family that all lives within 30 minutes of each other. We all live in the suburbs of a large city, far enough away that it is generally considered a safe area with neighbors all knowing each other, and car doors are left unlocked in the driveway. When I was young, my grandma used to watch my cousin and I at the same age, and she had 2 dogs. Dog 1 was Benji, a sweet, lovable dog. Dog 2 was Cheyenne. She was nice enough, but we always preferred Benji as he was nicer, more playful, and just generally wanted to be around us more. We would always play in the backyard with each other, sometimes with supervision and sometimes not. It was a fenced-in yard, and like I said, a nice enough area. Nothing strange at all. Anyway, one day, we're playing outside as per usual. Benji is inside with Grandma. Cheyenne was outside but just laying away from us, as we played with our cars or whatever we were messing with that day. We didn't notice until he started talking, but once he speaks, we notice an older man, maybe 50 or something, trying to talk to us through the fence, no more than 20 feet away. He seems nice enough, but hey, I was young so I had no clue. We kind of walk over to him, but not very close, about 6 feet from the fence. He's talking to us about God knows what, and this whole time Cheyenne had started coming over by us and growling lowly. We didn't think much of it and kept talking. I can't remember what the subject of conversation was. All I know is that at one point he began to try to call us over to him, and to which we wouldn't. We knew that much at least. He was getting upset, and at that point he started to climb over the fence. I have never been so afraid of a dog in my life. Cheyenne starts going absolutely berserk, as in if he had gotten over the fence, I don't think Cheyenne would have let him leave the yard alive. He jumps back, and my grandma hears this happening, so she rushes out to the yard and sees the guy, us, and the dog going insane. She starts screaming like I have never heard her scream before, as he runs away and down the road. We ended up being rushed inside, where Grandma sat us down very nicely and explained the stranger danger thing again. My grandma had no idea who it was. It wasn't a neighbor. The whole time the rest of the day, Cheyenne would not leave our sides. I was always a little scared of Cheyenne after that. I know now that it wasn't fair to her. She was only protecting us. After that, I learned that I will always trust my dogs. We've had dogs as long as I can remember, and I will trust any of them over any person every time. I have no idea what he was planning on doing if he got in the yard, and Cheyenne hadn't been there. So mister, stay away. And I'm sorry for being cold to you, Cheyenne. Please rest in peace. This incident happened in the summer of 2015. I lived by myself in a nice house inside a small town. Low crime, but still the occasional shady guy. Anyway, I'd worked that day on a smoke break. I watched a dog get thrown from a moving vehicle. 4-lane city traffic during the start of rush hour. I ran out there to scoop the little guy up and booked it back to my workplace. He wasn't injured, amazingly. As an animal lover, I decided to take him home with me until I could figure out what to do with him. I have a large amount of cats, and I always have. This was my first experience with a dog that I was solely responsible for. Now this guy was very shy. Head hung, tail tucked, jumpy. Just looking at me like I was about to do something to him. I was clueless on the subject of dog personalities and tendencies. I just knew that they needed to be taken out frequently. His first night with me, we had been out about 15 times, as I didn't want him doing it in my house. I was having the final cigarette of the day on my porch around 10:30. The dog was on a lead, chilling under my chair as I smoked and poked about on Reddit. I see a man walking on the sidewalk that runs by my house. He kept glancing up at me before passing. Shortly after he passed my house, he stopped, turned on his heel and approached. "Hey, can you tell me where 302 Church Street is?" he asked. I told him that I would look it up on my phone, which of course was taking a minute to pull up. He explained that he didn't have a phone of his own and he was attempting to get to a friend's house, taking small steps towards me the entire time. Finally, the address I summoned came up. "Hey, it's exactly 2 blocks north of here, right on the southwest corner of the cross street," I told him, pointing in the direction. He kept his eyes locked on me, continuing to slowly move closer. The doggo starts growling very softly at this point. I had forgotten he was even there until now. "Mind if I take a look at the map?" He grinned sheepishly. I'm bad with directions. I rose from my seat, pointing again. "It's truly just 2 blocks up this road. Just follow the road 2 blocks. The house will be on your left," making it very clear that I wasn't going to just hand him my phone. "Well, can I call them? I need to let them know that I'm coming," he said, still creeping closer, extending his hand. "No," I curtly replied. "How about text him?" Pushing forward still. "Dude, no." I started toward my door. Just let me see your phone." He was visibly becoming upset, clearly trying to contain it, and getting way too close to my porch. As a last-ditch effort of getting this dude to get away from me, I say, "You need to get the heck out of my yard. My dog is protective and he'll mess you up." Heck, I didn't know the first thing about this dog, let alone whether he had the capacity to mess someone up. I just hoped saying so would intimidate the pushy phone guy. Like I had said the magic words, the pupper springs into action. A la the wolf creature from the never-ending story, he emerges like a bullet from under the chair, growling and snarling, barking his little butt off. He jerks me near off the porch, trying to get at this guy. He sounded and acted like an 80-pound attack dog, not a 40-pound timid beagle mix. I was afraid. I didn't know if the pup would turn on me. As stated previously, at the time, I knew absolutely nothing about dogs. He backed his hindquarters into my legs, almost nudging me to the door, still carrying on. Eyes locked on Phone Dude and baring his teeth. Phone Dude holds up his hands and backs off, stammers something like, 2 blocks north, yeah? And begins walking that way. I go inside, cut off my lights, and I peek out the window at him. He glances at my house, assured that I'm inside, turns and begins walking the completely opposite direction that I pointed him in. Icing on the cake. He pulls a phone from his pocket and raises it to his ear to make a call. The dog is secured in his place as a member of my family that night. He is incredibly protective of me, and has frightened away another creep since this incident. He is attached at my hip, and has made it known that he is grateful to be in a safe, loving home, wherein he will never again become a projectile from a moving vehicle. His name is Hank, and I truly believe that night would have ended very poorly for me had he not been there. This happened a number of years ago, maybe 10. I used to live in a rather large house in the country. The nearest neighbor was about a quarter-mile away. This house was slightly on a hill, so the top of the driveway was at the top, and the house was at the bottom. We had a few very large pine trees at the base close to the house. They were so dense that you couldn't really see behind them from the top of the driveway. I remember that I was on my bike with my German Shepherd, Baron, R.I.P., in the driveway, and my dad was working on some gardening behind 2 of the large trees. At one point, I had rode to the top of the driveway to ride down the hill, and I saw a golden sedan. I don't remember the make, parked across the road with the front facing me. Inside, I saw 2 men, who were just staring at me. I didn't think anything of it at the time, and I rode down the hill carelessly. A few minutes later, the sedan slowly drove past the top of my driveway, and I saw it and again thought nothing of it. I was a very sheltered child, so much so that I didn't even know what kidnapping was, and if I did, I probably would have been more suspicious. I didn't see the car again for a few minutes, but it came back but the opposite direction, meaning that they had to have flipped a U-turn. This time, the passenger rolled down their window and yelled over to me, "Hey, want to come help us look for our dog? She's lost and only a puppy." However, my dad came out from behind the tree and told me to stay where I was. The men were startled and looked at my dad, 6'2" and pretty large, and simply said that they were looking for a lost dog. My dad asked what kind, and they went quiet and one said, "Chihuahua." Now, I mentioned that we live in the country, which was also home to hawks, snakes, and coyotes, as well as these men weren't our neighbors. We knew everyone in the street and almost everyone in the neighborhood. The only people that we didn't know lived very far back, almost 5 miles away. There was no way a dog that small could get anywhere near us, and even if it did, it probably would have been eaten by another wild animal anyway. My dad got really close to the window and muttered something. I never really heard what it was, but the men drove off and I've never seen them again. My mom later sent an email to the neighborhood. No one owned a golden sedan or had a chihuahua that had gotten out. After the incident, my parents drilled stranger danger into my head, which has made me the cautious person that I am today. I don't know what had happened if my dad was not there. I love you and I miss you every day. Years ago, man am I old, but let's say the mid-1990s, I worked as a woodland firefighter while in the Army Reserves. I worked as a spotter. Basically, I was stationed in a giant fire tower in the middle of a national park. My job was just as it sounds. I would use binoculars and look out for fire, smoke, and other telltale signs of fire. My nearest compadre was 5 miles or so from me. My days consisted of working my shift, taking long walks around the fire tower, being on the lookout for anyone who might be having illegal fires, looking out for wildlife, and staying afoot of bears and wolves. The way that our shifts worked back then was 1 week on, 1 week off. So we slept in the towers, cooked our food, etc. And there were nearby toilets and showers for when we needed them. One day, I came across an illegal bear trap. I had several ranger friends and I safely set off the trap and then picked it up to take it to the ranger station on one of my treks out for food in my Jeep. Poaching is illegal in the park, and it carried a big fine even back then, and some jail time. But it didn't stop the poachers from trying. I heard rifle shots and I headed back for my fire tower. We did have a rifle in the tower to be used in case of emergencies. Just a few months back, a fellow spotter had been mauled to death by a grizzly, so each tower had been outfitted with a rifle. I looked with my binoculars but did not see anything out of the ordinary. I radioed my coworker Ben, an older guy in the adjacent tower. He hadn't heard anything today but had come across a few traps himself. That night, after a dinner of franken beans and toast, I was writing to my future wife when I heard the rumbling of a truck. Thinking that it may be Ben, occasionally he would make the trek over. We would crack open a soda and chew the fat for a bit. But instead, I saw 4 men with rifles get out of the truck. One looked around and leaned up against the truck while the other 3 grabbed traps and began to set them up. I grabbed the rifle and my lantern and headed down the stairs. I was only 21, a farmer's son from a rural Virginia farming town, and even with 1 deployment behind me, I was naive. I should have called it in to the other rangers, but instead, thought that I could talk some sense into 4 dangerous men. I barely got a, "Hey, what are you doing?" out of my mouth before I was roughly shoved by rough hands. My lantern fell and I heard it crack. The rifle was kicked away from me and I felt the breath leave my chest when I was violently kicked in the stomach. I barely had caught my breath when I was grabbed by 2 of the men and was shoved forward into the woods. It seemed like we had walked for many miles, but in reality, it was probably only 1. However, I noticed that there were no sounds. In the forest, it is rarely silent. It's a cacophony of sounds even at night. Owls, the wolves, crickets. But on this night, nothing. Suddenly, I was shoved onto my knees and I felt hot tears well up. I thought of my parents, my little sister and brother and my fiance who were back home in Virginia. I heard the rack of a gun and shut my eyes and prayed. But suddenly, the night erupted. However, it was these sounds of sirens, those of the forest rangers, and behind them in his pickup, Ben, who had tried to radio me that he had heard a car's engine and came to my tower when I didn't reply. The poachers were arrested, and Ben drove me back to the tower. I was still shaking. He didn't lay into me for not following procedure, just said, "That was close, kid." I ended up leaving the job months later to take a job closer to home, but I never ran into any more poachers during the rest of my time. I kept in contact with Ben for a while, sent him a wedding invite and then a photo of my firstborn son in '97. However, as time usually does, we lost track of one another, and a few years back I googled him. He would have been 75 or so to discover that he had passed away a few years back. I don't know whatever came of those poachers, but I know I never want to meet them again. This happened to me a couple of months ago now, but when it first happened, given how crazy it was, it took me a few weeks to collect myself enough to type it up and post it. It's relevant for me to tell you up front that I'm a military veteran, and I have PTSD and anxiety as well as a pretty bad case of depression that I'm currently in my 3rd year of. I've read that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can massively improve PTSD symptoms and in turn help reduce anxiety, so I've been trying various techniques at home. The problem there is, my wife and I live in a small 2-bedroom, ground floor flat with an upstairs neighbor with absolutely no concept of other people. A jock douchebag type who's a personal trainer, but he trains at home too cause, gains. The kind of guy who's only got 2 topics of conversation, protein powder and steamed rice. I'm sure you can imagine the type. Anyway, with that being a constant issue, meditation and quiet mindfulness are just not possible with all the constant noise. My solution to this was to do my normal routine during the day, but take advantage of my insomnia later on. Around 11 or 12, I would put on my coat and my shoes as we lived near the beach. I figured that I could walk to the beach now that there's pretty much no people around. Walk on the sand and be mindful to the sounds of the ocean. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Well, it was the first 2 times, but you know what they say. 3rd time's the charm. The walk to the beach from my home isn't that far. Maybe a little over half a mile, but once I got there, I would walk to the very end of the beach until you reach the cliffs where there is a World War II artillery gun turret, which was another half-mile-ish. Sometimes I would walk the path of the cliff to the gun and stare out into the blackness of the midnight ocean, which was only broken by the occasional flash of light from the lighthouse. I would sit and listen to the waves crashing against the cliffs. Sometimes I would close my eyes and just concentrate on nothing but that sound. I felt safe there knowing that I was alone, just me and the ocean. Usually before I turned tail and head home, I would walk down to a small row of benches. They're all marked with plaques in remembrance of someone who also came and enjoyed the view, although I imagine they came during the day. The benches are close to an old pub that was shut down years ago, and I heard the place used to get used as a dogging site or a brothel or something back in the day. So when I saw vehicle headlights coming towards the pub, I figured it was just some young lads trying to catch some potential doggers at it. I sat on the bench and waited for the car to pass me, but as it rounded a bend in the road further up, I was momentarily lit up by the headlamps. The headlights of the vehicle went off immediately and the car went off-road and out of sight for a moment. At this point, I was fully alert and a bit cautious, so I dropped to one knee and I ducked behind the bench that I had been sitting on. The vehicle drove past me. It was only maybe 40 feet from me, and as the lighthouse illuminated the vehicle, I can now see that it was an old beat-up Land Rover kind of vehicle, with crappy camo paint on the wings. At that moment, someone popped out of the top of the vehicle with a scoped rifle and a big torch. In an instant, I was back in Iraq and my senses felt razor sharp. I dropped into my belt buckle and crawled into a patch of long grass adjacent to the benches. And then I got in a position where I could see them but they couldn't see me. The guy with his rifle shone his torch at the exact bench that I had been sitting on. Then the others were searching for me. He started looking all around him through the scope, looking for where I might have gone. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt as if they could hear it. I held my sleeve over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing, but more importantly to try and hide the condensation of my breath. The vehicle started to move to get a better view of the benches, so I started slowly crawling towards the main road, as not only is there a row of houses, but an old stone bus stop that I could take hard cover if they saw me and opened fire. After about 5 minutes of hiding in the long grass, it started to rain, and they was still clearly looking for me, but were now about 150 feet away. The guy with the rifle was scanning around with his eye down the scope, so I waited until he was looking away from me to seize my moment and run for cover. I pushed my hands hard into the wet dirt to launch myself onto my feet, and then I sprinted towards the bus stop, while throwing some zigzags in there just in case they had seen me. Luckily they hadn't, and I was now far enough away that I could take out my phone and call the cops. They were there with a riot van and a squad car in about 10 minutes, and as I was talking to the officers in the van, they spotted the gunner's vehicle and took off after them. The officers in the squad car stayed behind to talk to me. The rain was coming down in sheets by now, and they asked me if I was absolutely sure that it was a rifle, and I told them yes, it was 100%. No doubt in my mind at all. The officers both looked at each other and then one of them asked, "And what exactly is your experience with firearms?" I told them that I was ex-army and had seen my fair share of all kinds of firearms. They then asked me what I was doing there after midnight, which is a pretty fair question to be honest. I explained that quite ironically, I was taking a mindfulness walk to ease my PTSD symptoms. They were satisfied with that explanation, if not somewhat amused, and told me that the armed response unit was en route. I asked if they needed me to stay behind and make a statement, but the officers told me not to bother waiting around, because they most likely wouldn't need to take a statement beyond the call that I made. And also, it was raining down like crazy, so I should get home and get dry. It was over, but I still felt super weird and my heart was still thumping hard in my chest. I started the walk home, and when I was about halfway there, a police helicopter buzzed overhead and settled over the area where I had been sitting on the benches, with the searchlight going. It was right then, it hit me like a shotgun to the chest. That happened. That was real and it was here. What the heck? My head started swimming. My heart was pounding twice as hard now and my legs felt like jelly. And my lungs felt glitchy. I couldn't breathe properly. I dropped to my knees, crying in the street in the pouring rain, the only light coming from a nearby street lamp with a flickering bulb. I was gasping for breath, thoughts flashing in my head. If I had stayed still, if I hadn't hunched behind the bench, and if I had done any number of things differently or hadn't, then I could have gurgled my last breath alone in the dark and the cold wet dirt, and my wife would be none the wiser till the following day. I have no idea if they were even there for me, and if they were, how could they know that I would be there? I had been there only twice before, I suppose. It's not like there's any animals to hunt beyond foxes. But why hunt foxes from a vehicle with a rifle and a torch at midnight? Anyway, I'm not ashamed to say that the experience terrified me. I guess my army training helped me stay alert and to stay hidden. But I don't really know. I don't go walking at night anymore, and I still have the occasional nightmare about the whole thing. A few years ago, I entered the University of Lausanne to start my medical studies. I had just arrived in the city and even the country. I was very excited to start my year, to discover the university and to meet new people. Everything was going great until the end of the third week. Friday night around 9 p.m., I leave the library, say goodbye to my friends, and start to go home. The pace of work was already very intense, though we had been working all day and I was in a rush to get home. It was my favorite part of the day because I could put on my music, take the subway and then the train, and it gives me a chance to rest and unwind. Anyway, that night it was cold, so there was no one left outside. It takes me about 7 minutes to walk from the library to the subway. I'm walking quietly with my music in my ears when all of a sudden, I get a shiver that runs through my body from head to toe. I start to feel uncomfortable. as if someone was watching me. And at that point, I pause my music and decide to not turn around to check in case the person is trying to be really inconspicuous, and if I notice them, something might happen. I don't want to run either because I'm not sure if I can run faster and I don't know where to go. At this point, we pass a glass building, so I decide to look inside and pretend that I'm fixing my hair. I quickly glance in the corner of my eye and my blood runs cold. There is definitely someone walking a few feet behind me in a hoodie. I try to reassure myself that he had just finished work and that he's going home, that he's cold and that's why he's wearing his hoodie. But I didn't see a backpack, and there are no houses for civilians around. I decide to send a message to my mother saying, "Come and get me in front of the building. Please, I really don't feel it. It is important to know that the university is about 30 minutes by car from my house." At this moment, I don't find any other solution than taking refuge in a building while waiting for my mother to come and get me. As I was about to go back, I opened the door, took off my helmet, and went down these stairs to find a hiding place. We had entered by the 3rd floor. I thought that I was out of trouble when suddenly, I hear the door that I came in through open up. This time, I'm sure that he's after me, but since I'm new, I didn't know this building and where it led to. I run downstairs at full speed and I hear behind me the footsteps of this guy running down the stairs at full speed as well. I run without looking, being sure that he is running faster than me and that he'll catch up with me. I don't even know where I'm going, but I pray that I don't fall into a dead end. Looking back, I even think that it was really like in The Shining with the labyrinth scene. I didn't know how far ahead of him I was, so I opened a window in the hallway to make it look like I was out of there, and I opened a door a little further. It was a huge auditorium in the dark. I went down the stairs and hid under a desk in the middle, and I put my phone on silent. My mom had been texting me a lot asking me what was going on, and saying that she was on her way with my dad. I texted her, "I'm in the name of this building, and he's looking for me, please come quickly." I hid under that desk thinking that I was screwed. My hiding place sucked and he was going to find me any second. But then I heard a thud and a huge scream, and I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life as when I heard that scream. For 15 minutes, my mother was sending me messages, telling me to hang on. And at the end of those 15 long minutes waiting for him to find me, I finally got the message from my mom where she says that she is here with the police, that they're going to enter the building and that they need to know where I am. I just tell them that I'm on the 2nd floor because I had no idea what room I was in or which way I was going. After 2 minutes, I hear the door of the auditorium, and it was the police that came to get me. Once I got out, they took my statement and said that they would check with the university management. The next day, they contacted us and said that they saw on the surveillance cameras that there was indeed someone who had followed me when I had entered the building, but there were no cameras inside. You can't see the guy's face, and therefore, you don't know who it is. They just said that security was going to do patrols at night, and advised me to have someone with me when I went out at that time. We never heard about it again, and that's good.